myself someone that starts a series and then just binges the entire thing until it's done. I'm pretty sure I've said that several different times. However, it has come to my attention that that no longer seems to be the case. I've seen this one particular series kind of floating around YouTube for a while now. I think it was just Allie who started it, but I've seen several other people do it as well. They read a few different books from a few different series that they're in the middle of, and they're always in the middle of tons of different series. And when I first saw the first video of that, I was just like, how does that happen? Like, how do you get in the middle of that many series? Well, watching those videos has recently prompted me to also see how many series I'm in the middle of. And you guys, it's all of these basically, which is absolutely insane. I am in the middle of 27. There's 3 different categories that all of the books are kind of included into. The first one is the biggest one with 12 different series, which are all the series that I've started that have more than one book still left that I need to read. And then I have a list of 5 where there's only 1 book left in the series, so I'm like almost done with them. And then I have a total of 10 in the to be continued category, which is essentially I have caught up in the series, but more is being written. So those might not necessarily count exactly, but even without those, I still have 17 that I'm like actively in the middle of. So I definitely will be following in the footsteps of some of my fellow booktubers and joining in on the fun of doing the video series of like reading all the book series that I'm in the middle of. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of sit down and go through all of them with you guys, kind of talk about how I've liked the series so far, if I'm going to continue it, and then also at the end, I did want to throw in some series that I've had for a while that I also want to start. So more books to add to the list, you know, because why not? We're already 27 in the hole. So anyway, with all that being said, let's get into all of the book series that I am currently in the middle of, all 27 of them. And the very first series on this very long list is actually kind of 2 series that are being combined, which is the Touch of Darkness series and the Hades spin-off series, or the Hades Saga series. Both of those series are a Hades and Persephone retelling, essentially, and the Touch of Darkness series is in the perspective of Persephone, and the Hades Saga is in the perspective of Hades. Both series have the exact same story, but you're just getting the different perspectives, and I absolutely am obsessed with the concept of that. It has been so fun to read so far. As of right now, I've read the entirety of the Touch of Darkness series, which is 3 books, and then as far as the Hades Saga goes, I've read the first book, but I have not yet read the second and third one. I'm waiting for the last book in both of the book series to come out, which is A Touch of Chaos. That book is actually going to have both Hades and Persephone's perspective in it, and it's basically going to tie up both the Hades Saga and A Touch of Darkness saga. And on that same kind of note of Hades and Persephone, I started the Neon Gods series right after I started A Touch of Darkness, and that one is also, the first book in that series anyway, is also a Hades and Persephone retelling. Every book in that series is a different retelling, so it's not the same characters, and at the time, I didn't really understand or didn't enjoy the concept of having like interconnected standalones or just like standalones in general that were within a series. So for the longest time, I just like had no interest in continuing the series. Since then, I have now completely changed my mind or my thought process on that whole thing. As a matter of fact, a couple of my new favorite romance series are interconnected standalones, and I absolutely love them. So now I do see myself eventually maybe getting back into the Neon Gods series or the Dark Olympus series, but it's definitely not a priority. Next up, we have the Magnolia Parks series. I think I read the very first book in this series the beginning of last year, and I did actually really enjoy it, but my problem came with the fact that the next book in the series is about Daisy Hates, so kind of like a whole new main character. And again, at that time especially, I was still in that mode of just like wanting to continue the same person's story. But then also too, I also needed to still purchase the rest of the books. I had actually read the first book on my Kindle and decided I liked it enough to buy the books, so I was gonna wait until I received all the rest of them to get back into the series, and by the time I got around to purchasing them, I just didn't care anymore. There were so many other things going on, other things I wanted to read. All of that being said, I definitely want to continue with this series, especially with like the excitement over Into the Dark being released, which I did pre-order from Blackwell's, and it's actually on its way to me currently. The next series that I have to talk about is the Chestnut Springs series. This has been like the highlight of last year, of this year. I am so obsessed with this series, so I most definitely am going to be finishing it. I'm currently in the middle of Powerless, page 257 to be exact. It's a childhood friends to lovers story, and I am just obsessed. I've been so obsessed with this. Also, too, these covers are just so cute. And then another series that I've been absolutely obsessed with lately has been the Brutal Birthrights series. And this one, again, I am definitely going to be finishing. I have absolutely been loving. Chestnut Springs is kind of like a cowboy romance, small town romance vibes. These ones are mafia romance, which I didn't think I was going to like originally, but again, I've been absolutely obsessed with. As of right now, there is 6 in total, and I've currently read through the first 3. The third one was my least favorite, unfortunately, of the bunch so far, but the first 2 I really enjoyed. Next up, we have the Folk of the Air series, which again, I was so obsessed with. The actual original like Folk of the Air trilogy, like The Cruel Prince, I don't remember what the other 2 are called. Those 3 I've already read. I binged them over a weekend, but there is actually a spin-off of that series, and that one has a second book to it as well. So I've basically been waiting for that book to come out before I get into the spin-off, but I'm pretty sure that that second book is either out or going to be coming out very soon. So I will be getting into that hopefully soon as well. The next 2 series that I have to talk about are both ones that I don't know if I'm going to finish. The first one is The Daughter of Smoke and Bone. And I read that book and I enjoyed it decently enough, but it was very like insta-lovey. So I don't know. I do really love the UK covers of this series. So it's kind of like making me want to finish it because I want to own these books. But at the same time, like a couple of things of cover art is really maybe not the best reason to read a series, you know? And then the other series that I know for a fact that I will not be finishing is the Shatter Me series. Although I got through 4 of the books, and a couple of them I did actually really enjoy. The other ones and like the story overall is just too slow. And I feel like the main character's progression is just not really happening. Like she kind of starts to make a few steps toward, you know, growth, but then she slides all the way back to the beginning and you have to kind of like rebuild with her again and again and again. And it just got like tiring, which was very disappointing because so many people love this series and I really wanted to love it as well, but I know for a fact I'm not going to be finishing that. Next up, I have the Belladonna series. I read Belladonna at some point last year, the middle end, I don't really remember, but I really enjoyed it. And also too, I am completely obsessed with these UK covers. I think I also like this series as well because one of the love interests in this is Death, and that kind of has the same vibe as like Hades to me, like King of the Underworld, Death. Like I just love that type of character as a love interest. So I'm very excited to kind of get back into this series. And then we have the Emily Wilde series, which I'm also very excited for. I just purchased this book recently. The first one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and then the second one is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. So in this one, she's kind of like collecting data for an encyclopedia, and then in this one I think she's going to be collecting data to create a map. And these are just like super cute, whimsical, cozy fantasies. That being said, I did have like a little bit of like a touch and go reading journey with this book. It took me a while to kind of get invested in the story because it is very slow, and obviously I feel like the second book is going to have kind of that same vibe. So for me personally, I feel like I have to really be in the mood to read something slower, and right now I'm just really not. And then I have the Marlowe Murder Club, which is just like a cute little like murder mystery involving a group of like middle-aged to older women that go around their neighborhood solving murders. This one also was a little slow though at times. Because I do already have the second book, I definitely am going to read it at some point, but I don't know if this is a series that I'm going to continue to purchase. Next up, I have a series that I have recently become very obsessed with. This book was so good. This whole series is set in Regency, England, and I feel like the author did a really good job at expressing that with like the way that the characters talked and acted and things like that. Definitely going to be finishing it, and I definitely intend on picking up more from this author. So those are all of the 12 series that I'm in the middle of that I still have multiple books left to read. Now let's get into the 5 book series that I have where I only have 1 book left to read. And the first one is Divine Rivals. I read Divine Rivals at the end of last year and I really enjoyed it. And this series is only a duology, so we have Divine Rivals and then Ruthless Vows, which I definitely thought at this point I would have already read, but to be honest, the more time that passes, the more time I don't care about finishing it, especially because I've heard a couple different reviews where people were kind of meh about it. So I am gonna finish it, but I'm not in like the biggest rush And then the other book series that I have is the kind of like Legends and Lattes Books and Bone Dust series. Legends and Lattes is about Viv, who is opening up a coffee shop. She's kind of like retired from her day job, if you will, and she's opening up a coffee shop. And Bookshops and Bone Dust is kind of the story of her before Legends and Lattes. This was so freaking cute, and another one where it's a very found family vibe. I loved all the characters, so I'm definitely very excited to get into the second one. Next up is another fantasy romance series that I read early last year that I completely was obsessed with. I binged it over a weekend. At the time, I thought it was only a trilogy, but I have recently found out that there's actually a fourth book, and that series is A Kingdom of Stars and Shadows. The fourth book came out in August of last year, and I didn't know. I thought it was a trilogy. I thought it was done. Now that I do know, I'm definitely going to purchase that fourth book along with the rest of the series. The covers of all of those books are super cute, and I want to own them. Next up, we have a chunky little series. This is the Scythe series. The original series is actually a trilogy, and I did read all 3 of these books. I read Scythe, I think, at the end of 2022, and then I read these kind of more in the beginning of 2023, and I really loved this series. It was super fun, super cool concept, but I still have not read Gleanings yet, which is essentially not really a spin-off. It's just kind of like an addition to the original trilogy. It's essentially like short stories in the perspectives of a ton of different characters from this original series, and I think it kind of explains like the origin story of a scythe. I will say I have lost a little bit of interest in reading this over time, so this is definitely another one where I want to read it at some point, but it's definitely not like a priority for me at this moment in time. And then the very last series that I have for this category is a duology, which is All of Us Villains, and this I was so excited to continue. I actually already tried to continue this year, but it has been so long since I've read this book. I don't remember a single thing, and this is a prime example of why I need to just like binge a series or wait until all of the books in a series are out before I start it, because if too much time passes, I'm gonna forget. I need to start from scratch with this series, unfortunately, and I don't know when exactly that's gonna be because I really hate the idea of redoing something I've already done. Now let's get into our last category, which is all the series that I've caught up on, but they're still being written / books are coming out soon. And the first series that I have is actually very similar to the last one that we just talked about, where my memory is kind of coming into play. So this is the Adrian X Isolde series by Scarlett St. Clair, and The King of Battle and Blood is the first book, and it was so freaking good. I absolutely loved this book, and I was very excited for the second book to come out, which is Queen of Myth and Monsters, but I honestly don't remember anything from this book. Like, I know I read it, but I don't remember it. There is another book coming out. I have it written down for May of this year, and I'm a little concerned. Next up we have God Killer, and this was definitely a favorite of last year. I really enjoyed it. I kind of describe this as being like a dark cozy fantasy because it definitely has cozy fantasy elements, specifically kind of like a found family type of vibe, but there's definitely some dark elements to it. Literally, this book opens up with the main character's family being like slaughtered by a god, but it was so good and it was cute in a weird way, and I'm very excited to kind of continue this group's adventures in the next book, which is coming out also very soon in March 12th. Next up we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts, and I have very mixed feelings on this book. I enjoyed it overall, but I do feel like she pulled very heavily from her references, like her inspirations for this book, namely Hunger Games and The Red Queen. This is a debut novel, and she wrote it when she was very young, so I am interested to see like how she improves as a writer, but I don't know. I'm still very mixed on whether or not I'm going to continue this series. Next up we have Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I don't actually know what this series is called, but it's Ninth House and Hellbent, and this one was a little slow for me, but Hellbent I absolutely ate up. I freaking loved it, and I am very excited to continue the series. Next up, I have a series that I have talked so much about. I have been completely obsessed with, Kingdom of the freaking Wicked. The whole concept of having 7 princes of hell that embody the 7 deadly sins, and each of them have their own realm and things like that that are completely of that sin is just my favorite thing ever. And I did actually finish the original trilogy of this book, which mostly focused on Wrath's love story. So essentially we have 6 more Princes of Hell we need to get through, which is where this book comes in. This is Throne of the Fallen, and it's kind of a spin-off of Kingdom of the Wicked, and this book specifically has Envy's story. And from what I've heard from a couple of you guys, Carrie Maniscalco is actually currently working on the next one, or it's already like set to be released, which a lot of people are thinking it's either going to be Gluttony or Gluttony or Sloth. Were those the two? Sloth was definitely one of them. Either way, there's another book coming. It's going to focus on another Prince of Hell, so I feel like it's pretty safe to say that she's going to be making a book for each prince, and I am over the moon excited about that. Like, I'm so excited. And speaking of spin-off series, the next one that I have to talk about is The Scarlet Veil, and this is a spin-off of the Serpent and Dove series, which I also just kind of recently finished and also absolutely loved. I had actually planned on reading this right after Serpent and Dove, but then I read the synopsis and it just seemed like one of the characters that we grew to love from the last series was going to get hurt, and I just wasn't sure that I was ready for that. But after mentioning that in a recent video, one of you guys actually commented and was like, I totally thought the same thing, but I ended up really loving it. So I went ahead and read it, and I loved this. I was gonna say I love it even more than Serpent and Dove, but I don't know if that's true. But I still really, really loved it. I'm so used to with movies and TV shows and things like that, whenever there's a spin-off or a sequel, it's never as good as the original. So whenever I go into a spin-off of a book, I kind of assume it's gonna be kind of a similar vibe, but it never is. I'm always just as much in love with the spin-off as I am the original series. The Serpent and Dove series mostly focuses on witches and witch hunters, and then also werewolves were kind of thrown in there and a couple other creatures. But this one focuses mostly on vampires, and I think vampires are my new favorite fantasy romance thing. I think it kind of plays into the fact of the death, Hades, King of the Underworld type of thing. Same vibe. And I thought it was just supposed to be a standalone, but it's not. There's going to be another book. Again, I don't know when the next book is supposed to come out. I'm really crossing my fingers it's going to be soon because I loved this so much and I want to keep going with the story. And then the next series that we have, I'm sure you can guess what it is, just purely from these black edges. But the next series that we have to talk about is Fourth Wing. It took me a while to pick up Fourth Wing, and I was very skeptical about it at first because everyone loved it so much. So I just kind of assumed it was going to be one of those things that once I finally read it, I was going to be disappointed. But I was not even one little bit. I absolutely loved this series, and of course I was very excited to continue it with Iron Flame. Unfortunately, I didn't love this one as much as I liked Fourth Wing, but I still really enjoyed it, and I am still very, very excited for the next book. Next up, we have the infamous ACOTAR, and like everyone else, I absolutely loved this series. I read the first 3 books in this series very, very quickly. This one took me quite some time. I think it took me just as long to read this one as it did to read these first 3 books, if not longer. The first 3 books in this series are basically the core books of the series, but the author has come out with kind of a little bit of a novella, which is still on my shelf. I didn't bring it down. The rest of the books in the series, I believe, are going to be like this one, where you essentially get more of the story about other specific characters. So very similarly to kind of the concept of the Kingdom of the Wicked, where the original series focused on one Prince of Hell or one romance, and the rest of the books are going to focus on other people's and their romances and their stories. I'm really glad that Sarah J. Maas is doing this kind of concept, because I do feel like within the original 3 books, there was definitely some people's stories that I feel were left a little loose-ended. Second to last with our series that I'm currently caught up with, we have the Never After series, and these are essentially dark romances that are inspired by Disney movies. And overall, I have really enjoyed this series. Some of the books more than others, but just overall, again, really enjoyed the series, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next one. And then last but not least for this category, we have Mountains Made of Glass by Scarlett St. Clair. And I don't actually know what the series is called. I think it's fairy tale something, but essentially she's going to be doing kind of spicy fantasy romance retellings of kind of classic fairy tales. Originally when I read Mountains Made of Glass, it was only available on Kindle, and it's a pretty short book, it's shorter than your typical book, but it was so good and I really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited to kind of continue on with that series. And now, very quickly, I want to do one more category, which is the book series that I currently own that I want to start, because I have had so many books just sitting on my shelves for so long. Specifically, the first one that we have, which is the Plated Prisoner series. I have had this on my shelves for a year at this point, and that is just insane. This is basically like a dark, spicy retelling of King Midas, and I've literally heard nothing but good things about this series, so I don't know why it is taking me so long to read this. Like, why is this still on my shelves untouched? I don't know. Next up, we have, to no one's surprise, Throne of Glass. I have literally mentioned me reading this so many times. I'm sure you guys are all like rolling your eyes. I am so sorry. I definitely want to start this very soon. I was supposed to start it at the end of January and I just didn't get the time to. And then February rolled around and I wanted to kind of like be in my romance era. So I kind of put this on the back burner for right now. But March, we're starting this in March, and I feel like I'm going to start it off with like a 24 hours of reading to kind of like really get through as much of it as possible, like really quickly, so we can actually get it done, you know? And then on that same note, the next series that we have is the Crescent City series. I've heard from watching other people's videos and then also from comments from you guys that people recommend reading this after Throne of Glass, so that's why it's kind of just been like hanging out waiting. The next series that I have is a sci-fi series, which I think is the reason why I haven't gotten into it yet, but that is Red Rising. I basically purchased this series because I saw Ashlyn talk about it and she really enjoys them, and I feel like we have similar, from watching her videos, I think we have similar kind of like tastes in books. So I went ahead and bought them, and they've just been like sitting on my shelves for a while now. Next up, we have two series from the same author. You might be able to guess, but we have the Caraval and then also the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. These two book series are within the same universe, and a lot of people say to read this before you read this. So that's what I plan to do. And I just have not gotten around to it yet, but I definitely want to sooner than later because these are definitely having a moment right now, specifically this series. Next up, I have Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This one is kind of like a high fantasy, which I don't know that I've ever read before. So I'm very intrigued, also a little nervous. So here's kind of like my first step into high fantasy. And then I'm just gonna grab the last of these. I literally just talked about all of these books in my most recent video, which was a book haul. So I'm gonna go over these like extra quick. We have the One Dark Window series, which as of right now is just 2 books. I don't know if there's gonna be more, but this book in particular is having a moment right now. And then we have The House of Salt and Sorrow and The House of Roots and Ruin. Again, I don't know if this is just a duology, if there's gonna be more. Either way, very excited about this series. And then last but not least, for this entire video, we have Three Dark Crowns, which is a series of 5 books. And this one just has like a really fun plot. Again, I just talked about it, I'm not gonna go into it, but I think out of all the books that I hauled in my last video, this one I think has the most intriguing story, and I'm very excited to get into this series as well. I feel like this is something that I'm gonna be super absorbed into. And with that, those are all 27 plus book series that I am in the middle of / want to start. So many books.